Welcome to the HIT Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. This is our episode with Kirk from Garner. We went a little bit long, and as we commit to you guys, we want to keep these to our bite-sized time length. So this will be part one. Join us for the episode next. Welcome to the HIT Podcast, HIT, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. As we do every week, we're dropping into your feed on Tuesdays with what I hope are bite-sized, digestible, well-curated conversations of what's going on in the space. This week's episode will be no exception. I'm super excited to get into it. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions. And without any further ado, I bring on Kirk. Kirk, I'm super excited to talk to you about your organization because we were just talking a little bit like off air. It's like, hey, aren't we partnering together on a couple opportunities? I'm like, yes, not only am I excited to bring you the audience, I believe in the product, have it in front of clients. But before we dive into any of that, let me back it up. Let me let you do an intro. Tell the audience kind of who you are, what chair you're sitting in, and why we're here today.
Yeah, this is a fun one for me, Toby. So thanks so much for the invite to join you on the podcast. So Kirk Czonstka, like you, I actually spent about 16 years on the benefits consulting side myself. So probably we're looking to solve a lot of the same challenges that you and your team are looking to solve for on an ongoing basis, and was really obsessed with how do we help support employers and their employees and kind of mix together economics and empathy as we really help to support some of the major challenges that are happening from a benefits perspective. When I was on the consulting side of the house, I joined Garner back in November, so coming up on a year. And when I joined, I was asked to come in and to lead our consultant and broker partnership strategy, and more recently had taken on our health plan and non-health plan distribution strategy as well. So super excited to be on a conversation with you today. I spend almost all day, every day on calls with brokers and with their clients and with their prospects, talking about the type of value that our organization can bring as they're looking to solve for some major challenges that are happening from a U.S. healthcare system perspective today, and really impacting all organizations from a cost and an affordability perspective.
Yeah, it's funny you say you spend all day on calls and stuff, because that's a bit of the premise of this show is, and I know, Kirk, you were talking about how you spent a long time as a benefits consultant, so you understand the day job where it's like, I am sitting in on a lot of these conversations. I'm having a lot of this dialogue, and a lot of it I find is, all right, someone's going to explain it to you, and then hopefully you explain it to someone else, and then we can get it in front of them, etc. So I ended up just thinking, man, if I can have good discernment and kind of weed out the conversations that aren't that interesting or, in my opinion, aren't going to go anywhere, and maybe just bring forward those kind of, hey, behind four walls, Garner and the brokers are talking out there, and get it into the light and get it into more people. So I really appreciate you being on today, and kind of, I can serve as sort of like by proxy if I'm a, interested HR person listening in, like, what is Garner? How does it help? So let me kind of, thank you for fitting into the kind of model of the podcast, and kind of turn it over to you to say, like, okay, fine, great, Toby, you have good discernment, fine, go ahead. What is Garner?
Well, as I mentioned, during the kind of the kickoff here, there are a lot of challenges out there that employers are trying to solve for, both from an HR and a finance perspective, as they think about how do they support their employees, how do they support their bottom line when it comes to healthcare benefits and expense. And, at our core, Garner is actually a data and analytics company. So we started back in 2018 as a data and analytics company. We've actually amassed, no hyperbole, about 75% of all claims that flow through the U.S. healthcare system.
And this is billions of data points.
Yeah, we are talking about billions of data points. We are talking about 320 million plus actual member care journeys that are flowing through the U.S. healthcare system. So really a nice balance of commercial claims. We do ultimately supplement the commercial claims with CMS data as well. But really, we use that data to give ourselves a full and clear picture on what is the one thing that, if we can focus on one priority as we think about healthcare in the US, what is the one intervention that's actually going to work to improve health outcomes and lower total cost of care? And as we look at all that data, and we have really smart data scientists and healthcare economists that are looking at that, it turns out that when Garner analyzed the data, we think it's really clear that the individual doctor matters more than anything else. And that could be the primary care doctor that somebody is seeing. It could be a surgeon. It could be a specialist. But really, our focus is on how do we get that patient, that member, to make the right upstream choice of what doctor they're going to see, because that is going to be attributed to the biggest impact on the cost of that member's care. And when you kind of think about it, Toby, you know, the patient trusts their doctor when it comes to what tests they're getting, what prescriptions they're getting, the surgeries that they have to get, where that surgery is performed, the site of service, what are the outcomes after that surgery, and so on. When's the last time that when you chose a healthcare system to get a surgery at, the hospital was the one holding the scalpel? It's not the hospital, it's actually the individual doctor. So we think it's really clear that the doctors performing the medicine are the ones that are actually going to have the biggest impact. And our goal at Garner is to marry the data that we've ingested, the methodology that we've ultimately built to figure out who are the best doctors in any geography, in any subspecialty of care, and how do we actually get members to see those doctors so that they have the best outcomes, they have the best overall total cost of care. And I think that's where Garner really has a novel approach to driving people to not just access the data, but actually use that data to go see the doctors that are going to have the biggest impact on the cost of their episode, and ultimately the cost of care that that employer is ultimately going to be on the hook for when it comes to their health and benefits expense.
Yeah, I think that was one of the more interesting things for me is, and I love that you position yourselves as sort of like a data and analytics company, you know, kind of at your core, because that's what's interesting for me is Garner, like, you're not a network, you're not a narrow network. It's sort of a search tool to really, and this is my words, not yours, so you know, you can clean it up if I'm not saying it properly, but in my view, you sort of say, hey, look, we're going to sit over the top of your existing network. I'm not going to narrow your network. What I'm going to do is look at your network, look at your area. So even furthermore, if you're trying to say to me like, well, do they have doctors in my area? It's like, there is no, they have doctors in my area sort of a thing. It's, we look at all of the doctors in whatever area you're in the network that you guys have. And we overlay, again, like you said, some of the 320 million people's full arcs of care, billions of data points to say, hey, look, Mr. and Mrs. Employee, it seems like you need to see the doctor for XYZ reason. Before you go to Yelp or Google or throw a dart and just go to some doctor or another, we have a lot of data that shows if you choose this doctor or that doctor, it makes a big impact, as you said, downstream on, first of all, is this doctor like straight to surgery, or are we going to do some physical therapy stuff? Because that could be really expensive. And when they do the surgery, as you said, is it in a super expensive hospital or the same surgeon in a different facility? Or even one of the things that was so profound is this is half question, half diatribe, but it was so amazing to me to find out, even within the same hospital, this doctor's got a post-surgery infection rate of 30%, and that doctor's got a post-surgery infection rate of 4%, or some wild delta that's out there. So I say all that to tee you up to riff. So riff.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a really, really good segue. I know you kind of heard our story before, and you're kind of thinking about Garner for a couple of your employer customers right now. But, you know, I would tell you it's interesting, right? So if you think about any sort of layperson that's out in the US right now and just got diagnosed with something scary. So let's just say, you know, you were just diagnosed with colon cancer. You're like, oh my gosh, like scary diagnosis. If I have the means to go somewhere, I got to find the best possible place in the country to go have this part of my colon removed and hopefully, avoid having that cancer from spreading beyond, where the starting point was. And the information that's available to people right now, historically, it's, okay, I'm going to go ask my neighbor. I'm going to go ask my coworker down the hall. I'm going to go out and do a rudimentary search on Google. Maybe I find some sort of a reputable type of a document out there, and maybe I find something like the U.S. News and World Report, and I do some drill into that U.S. News and World Report. I find their top hospital ranking, and maybe I even find one that's specific to my own type of condition or the type of care that I need. So let's just say I go find that U.S. News and World Report. I do a top hospital search. I look for surgical oncology specific to colon cancer. And you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to get on a plane. I'm going to fly to Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, or I'm going to fly to Cedars-Sinai or UCLA or NYU. Those all look really good. Like getting on the plane and flying to one of those facilities, the best in class facilities in the country, are really going to reduce the likelihood of me having a major complication, which by the way, is going to drive up the costs for my employer, and it's going to have impacts on my productivity and my ability to get back to work and so on and so forth. But when you actually don't just take the word of the health system, not the word of the hospital, but when you just take the stats specific to the health system in mind, but you actually drill into the specific doctors, the specific surgical oncologists that are practicing at these four, renowned brand name, high performing facilities in the country, you actually find that their individual physicians, to your point, Toby, practice medicine in very different ways. So I could walk into Mayo Clinic, which by all accounts is the best health system in the country for surgical oncology, but I have the same likelihood of seeing a doctor that has a 7% infection rate as one that has a 30% infection rate. So I think I'm making all the right decisions and doing all the right research in the world. And I walk into a place after flying across the country to get part of my colon removed, and oh gosh, I'm seeing a doctor that actually has an infection rate that's pushing 30%. So
well, because prior to you guys, they would have no way of knowing. And even if you said, okay, try Yelp or Google or whatever search engine, you're not going to have 5,000 people that had your exact same episode of care that gave a bunch of feedback. But Garner, you guys have, whatever you said, 70, 75% of all claims information. So you look for this stuff and can report back. And what I think is so fascinating, like you said, you do the right thing, you walk in the right doors, right? I walk in the Mayo Clinic, whatever. But even backing that up, the idea that unique to healthcare, pretty much. I mean, the relationship between cost and quality is tenuous at best, if non-existent at all. I mean, when I pay $80 for a cell phone, I expect a dodgy flip phone. When I pay $1,000, I expect a really good camera, internet, all sorts of great things on my phone, because typically as a consumer, I'm taught that when I pay more, I get better quality. And that just isn't true in healthcare.
it's totally right. And there really is this paradox that lies at the heart of the healthcare crisis that, we're all trying to solve for clients and for their members every day. There's really no relationship between cost and quality in healthcare. In fact, the data actually consistently shows that higher quality care often correlates with lower costs. And that's because a couple of things. Number one, the price per procedure is not actually correlated to quality. And number two, the utilization of healthcare services declines with increased quality due to fewer complications and better health outcomes. So you're 100% right. And unfortunately, most of these narrow network solutions that have been out there historically, whether they're driven by health plans or other third-party vendors, they really are focused on just driving down unit cost, driving down unit cost, driving down unit cost. However, when you actually look at the data, when we look at our data, that 75% of all claims in the country, we find that narrow network solutions that just focus on unit costs alone, they're really missing the forest for the trees, because suddenly we're seeing that the quality delivered in these narrow network solutions is actually worse than if I just went into any average PPO doctor tomorrow and got some type of care. These doctors are not ultimately choosing the right process. They're not using clinically appropriate care pathways. They might be jumping right to knee surgery when really physical therapy will be a much more appropriate course of treatment. Obviously, a much less aggressive form of treatment, a much less costly form of treatment. When they actually do go under the knife, what are the outcomes of those procedures? What site of care are doctors directing those types of procedures to? Those are all major quality and cost of care variables that are not generally contemplated when you're just looking at unit cost altogether. So I think it's really important as you think about total cost of care, you really just can't think about costs. You have to think about the quality aspect of all this as well.
Well, you want to think about both sides of it, even if you're just sort of coldly, rationally backing this up and saying, okay, as an employee, I want you to get the best quality of care because I care about you. I want you to get the best quality of care because I want you back in the office and on the front lines sooner than later. I want you to get the best quality of care because if you do, when you're under my roof, perhaps that's going to impact recruitment and retention and all those sorts of things. And then as an employer, particularly if you have any claims-based skin in the game. So if you're self-funded and you're looking at this to say, whoa, Garner, it becomes a tool to back up my employees' on-ramp to healthcare. Where do they go? Where do they start with this doctor? And downstream, this claim that could have been $80,000, $90,000 is going to be 10, right? Or less, something like that. So when you're self-funded, I often joke, you're out of the health insurance game and you're in the health care game, right? You're now the insurer. And so anything you can do to impact specifically monetarily and more importantly, without quality. So for the right reasons, you want your employee back to work, you want him or her healthy, you love that employee. And also it's so impactful for the bottom line. That's all the time we have for you on this week's episode. We will be breaking this over 2 episodes. Our conversation with Kirk is fascinating. We did not want to cut it short, but we want to stick to our time frame. Thank you to our sponsors, TrueHue. Thank you so much for joining us. Join us next week for part 2 of this conversation. Join us every week. And until next week, make this the best week yet.